Good evening. Welcome back to uh, Slapstick, Lonesome No More. This is part 3. We left off at chapter 15. Okay. 15. Eliza and I were, of course, not allowed to return to the consolations of idiocy. We were bawled out severely whenever we tried. Yes, and the servants and our parents found one byproduct of our metamorphosis positively delicious. They were suddenly entitled to bawl us out. What hell we caught from time to time. Yes, and Dr. Mott was fired, and all sorts of experts were brought in. It was fun for a while. The first doctors to arrive were specialists in hearts and lungs and kidneys and so on. When they studied us organ by organ and body fluid by body fluid, we were masterpieces of health. They were genial. They were all family employees in a way. They were research people whose work was financed by the Swain Foundation in New York. That was how they had been so easily rounded up and brought to Galen. The family had helped them. Now they would help the family. They joshed us a lot. One of them, I remember, said to me that it must be fun to be so tall. "What's the weather like up there?" he said, and so on. The joshing had a soothing effect. It gave us the mistaken impression that it did not matter how ugly we were. I still remember what an ear, nose, and throat specialist said when he looked up into Eliza's enormous sinus cavities with a flashlight. "My God, nurse," he said, "call up the National Geographic Society. We have just discovered a new entrance to Mammoth Cave." Eliza laughed. The nurse laughed. I laughed. We all laughed. Our parents were in another part of the mansion. They kept away from all the fun. That early in the game, though, we had our first disturbing tastes of separation. Some of the examinations require that we be several rooms apart. As the distance between Eliza and me increased, I felt as though my head were turning to wood. I became stupid and insecure. When I was reunited with Eliza, she said that she had felt very much the same sort of thing. "It was as though my skull was filling up with maple syrup," she said. And we bravely tried to be amused rather than frightened by the listless children we became when we were parted. We pretended they had nothing to do with us, and we made up names for them. We called them Betty and Bobby Brown. And now it is as good a time as any, I think, to say that when we read Eliza's will after her death in a Martian avalanche, we learned that she wished to be buried wherever she died. Her grave was to be marked with a simple stone, engraved with this information and nothing more. "Here lies Betty Brown." Yes, and it was the last specialist who looked us over, a psychologist, Dr. Cordelia Swain Cordiner, who decreed that Eliza and I should be separated permanently, should, so to speak, become forever Betty and Bobby Brown. 16. Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky, the Russian novelist, said one time that one sacred memory from childhood is perhaps the best education. I can think of another quickie education for a child, which, in its way, is almost as salutary. Meeting a human being who is tremendously respected by the adult world, and realizing that the person is actually a malicious lunatic. That was Eliza's and my experience with Dr. Cordelia Swain Cordiner, who was widely believed to be the greatest expert on psychological testings in the world, with the possible exception of China, Nobody knew what was going on in China anymore. I have an Encyclopedia Britannica here in the lobby of the Empire State Building, which is the reason I am able to give Dostoevsky his middle name. Dr. Cordelia Swain Cordiner was invariably impressive and gracious when in the presence of grown-ups. She was elaborately dressed the whole time she was in the mansion, in high-heeled shoes and fancy dresses and jewelry. We heard her tell our parents one time, "Just because a woman has 3 doctor's degrees and heads a testing corporation which bills $3 million a year, that doesn't mean she can't be feminine." When she got Eliza and me alone, though, she seethed with paranoia. "None of your tricks. No more of your snotty little kid millionaire tricks with me," she would say. And Eliza and I hadn't done anything wrong. She was so enraged by how much money and power our family had, and so sick, that I don't think she even noticed how huge and ugly Eliza and I were. We were just 2 more rotten, spoiled little rich kids to her. "I wasn't born with any silver spoon in my mouth," she told us. Not once, but many times. "Many was the day we didn't know where the next meal was coming from," she said. "Have you any idea what that's like?" "No," said Eliza. "Of course not," said Dr. Cordiner, and so on. Since she was paranoid, it was especially unfortunate that her middle name was the same as our last name. "I'm not your sweet Aunt Cordelia," she would say. "You needn't worry your little aristocratic brains about that. Where my grandfather came from Poland, he changed his name from Stankiewicz to Swain." Her eyes were blazing. "Say Stankiewicz!" We said it. "Now say Swain," she said. We did. And finally one of us asked her what she was so mad about. This made her very calm. "I am not mad," she said. "It would be very unprofessional for me to ever get mad about anything. However, let me say that asking a person of my caliber to come all this distance into the wilderness to personally administer tests to only 2 children is like asking Mozart to tune a piano. It is like asking Albert Einstein to balance a checkbook. Am I getting through to you, Mistress Eliza, and Master Wilbur, as I believe you are called?" "Then why did you come?" I asked her. Her rage came out into the open again. She said this to me with all possible nastiness. "Because money talks, little Lord Fauntleroy." We were further shocked when we learned that she meant to administer tests to us separately. We said innocently that we would get many more correct answers if we were allowed to put our heads together. She became a tower of irony. "Why, of course, Master and Mistress," she said. "And wouldn't you like to have an encyclopedia in the room with you, too? And maybe the faculty of Harvard University to tell you the answers in case you're not sure?" "That would be nice," we said. "In case nobody has told you," she said, "this is the United States of America, where nobody has a right to rely on anybody else, where everybody learns to make his or her own way." "I'm here to test you," she said, "but there's a basic rule for life I'd like to teach you too. You'll thank me for it in years to come." This was the lesson. "Paddle your own canoe," she said. "Can you say that and remember it?" Not only could I say it, but I remember it to this day. Paddle your own canoe. Hi-ho. So we paddled our own canoes. We were tested as individuals at the stainless steel table in the tile-lined dining room. When one of us was in there with Dr. Cordiner, with Aunt Cordelia, as we came to call her in private, the other one was taken as far away as possible, to the ballroom at the top of the tower at the north end of the mansion. Withers Witherspoon had the job of watching whichever one of us was in the ballroom. He was chosen for the job because he had been a soldier at one time. We heard Aunt Cordelia's instructions to him. She asked him to be alert to clues that Eliza and I were communicating telepathically. Western science, with a few clues from the Chinese, had at last acknowledged that some people could communicate with certain others without visible or audible signs. The transmitters and receivers for such spooky messages were on the surfaces of sinus cavities, and those cavities had to be healthy and clear of obstruction. The chief clue which the Chinese gave the West was this puzzling sentence, delivered in English, which took years to decipher. I feel so lonesome when I get hay fever or a cold. Hi-ho. Well, mental telepathy was useless to Eliza and me over distances greater than 3 meters. With one of us in the dining room and the other in the ballroom, our bodies might as well have been on different planets, which is in fact their condition today. Oh sure, and I could take written examinations, but Eliza could not. When Aunt Cordelia tested Eliza, she had to read each question out loud to her and then write down her answer. And it seemed to us that we missed absolutely every question, but we must have answered a few correctly, for Dr. Cordner reported to our parents that our intelligence was low normal for their age. She said further, not knowing that we were eavesdropping, that Eliza would probably never learn to read or write, and hence could never be a voter or hold a driver's license. She tried to soften this some by observing that Eliza was quite an amusing chatterbox. She said that I was a good boy, a serious boy, easily distracted by his scatterbrained sister. He reads and writes, but has poor comprehension of the meanings of words and sentences. If he were separated from his sister, there is every reason to believe that he could become a filling station attendant or a janitor in a village school. His prospects for a happy and useful life in a rural area are fair to good. Pardon. The People's Republic of China was at that very moment secretly creating literally millions upon millions of geniuses by teaching pairs of small groups of congenial, telepathically compatible specialists to think as single minds. And those patchwork minds were the equals of Sir Isaac Newton's or William Shakespeare's, say. Oh yes, and long before I became President of the United States of America, the Chinese had begun to combine those synthetic minds into intellects so flabbergasting that the universe itself seemed to be saying to them, I await your instructions. You can be anything you want to be. I will be anything you want me to be. Hi-ho. I learned about this Chinese scheme long after Eliza died, and long after I lost all my authority as President of the United States of America. There was nothing I could do with such knowledge by then. One thing amused me, though. I was told that poor old Western civilization had provided the Chinese the inspiration to put together such synthetic geniuses. The Chinese got the idea from the American and European scientists who put their heads together during the Second World War, with the single-minded intention of creating an atomic bomb. Hi-ho. 17. Our poor parents had first believed that we were idiots. They had tried to adapt to that. Then they believed that we were geniuses. They had tried to adapt to that. Now they were told that we were dull normals, and they were trying to adapt to that. As Eliza and I watched through peepholes, they made a pitiful and fog-bound plea for help. They asked Dr. Cordelia Swain Cordner how they were to harmonize our dullness with the fact that we could converse so learnedly on so many subjects, in so many languages. Dr. Cordner was razor keen to enlighten them on just this point. The world is full of people who are very clever at seeming much smarter than they really are, she said. They dazzle us with facts and quotations and foreign words and so on, whereas the truth is they know almost nothing of life, nothing of use in life as it is really lived. My purpose is to detect such people, so that society can be protected from them, and so they can be protected from themselves. Your Eliza is a perfect example, she went on. She has lectured me on economics and astronomy and music, in every other subject you can think of, and yet she can neither read nor write, nor will she ever be able to. She said that our case was not a sad one, since there were no big jobs we wished to hold. They have almost no ambition at all, she said, so life can't disappoint them. They want only that life as they have known it should go on forever, which isn't possible, of course. Father nodded sadly. And the boy is the smarter of the two? To the extent that he can read and write, said Dr. Cordiner. He isn't nearly as socially outgoing as his sister. When he is away from her, he becomes as silent as a tomb. I suggest that he be sent to some special school, which won't be too demanding academically or too threatening socially, where he can learn to paddle his own canoe. Do what? Said Father. Dr. Cordner told him again. Paddle his own canoe, she said. Eliza and I should have kicked our way through the wall at that point, should have entered the library ragingly in an explosion of plaster and laths. But we had sense enough to know that our power to eavesdrop at will was one of the few advantages we had, so we stole back to our bedrooms, and then burst into the corridor, and came running down the front stairs and across the foyer and into the library, doing something we had never done before. We were sobbing. We announced that if anybody tried to part us, we would kill ourselves. Dr. Cordner laughed at this. She told our parents that several of the questions in her tests were designed to detect suicidal tendencies. I absolutely guarantee you, she said, that the last thing either one of these two would do would be to commit suicide. Her saying this so jovially was a tactical mistake on her part, for it caused something in Mother to snap. The atmosphere in the room became electrified as Mother stopped being a weak and polite and credulous doll. Mother did not say anything at first, but she had clearly become subhuman in the finest sense. She was a coiled female panther, suddenly willing to tear the throats out of any number of child-rearing experts in defense of her young. It was the one and only time that she would ever be irrationally committed to being the mother of Eliza and me. Eliza and I sensed this sudden jungle alliance telepathically, I think, at any rate. I remember that the damp velvet linings of my sinus cavities were tingling with encouragement. We left off our crying, which we were no good at doing anyway. Yes, and we made a clear demand which could be satisfied at once. We asked to be tested for intelligence again, as a pair this time. We want to show you, I said, how glorious we are when we work together, so that nobody will ever talk about parting us again. We spoke carefully. I explained who Betty and Bobby Brown were. I agreed that they were stupid. I had said we had had no experience with hating, and had had trouble understanding that particular human activity whenever we encountered it in books. But we are making small beginnings in hating now, said Eliza. Our hating is strictly limited, at this point, to only two people in this universe, to Betty and Bobby Brown. Dr. Cordiner, as it turned out, was a coward, among other things. Like so many cowards, she chose to go on bullying at the worst possible time. She jeered at Eliza's with my request, at Eliza's and my request. So what kind of world do you think this is, she said, and so on. So Mother got up and went over to her, not touching her, and not looking her in the eyes either. Mother spoke to her throat, and in a tone between a purr and a growl, she called Dr. Cordner an overdressed little sparrow fart. 18. So Eliza and I were retested, as a pair this time. We sat side by side at the stainless steel table in the tiled dining room. We were so happy. A depersonalized Dr. Cordelia Swain Cordiner administered the tests like a robot, while our parents looked on. She had furnished us with new tests, so that the challenges would all be fresh. Before we began, Eliza said to Mother and Father, we promised to answer every question correctly, which we did. What were the questions like? Well, I was poking around the ruins of a school on 46th Street yesterday, and I was lucky enough to find a whole batch of intelligence tests, all set to go. I quote, "A man purchased 100 shares of stock at $5 a share. If each share rose 10 cents in the first month, decreased 8 cents the second month, and gained 3 cents the third month, what was the value of the man's investment at the end of the third month? Or try this. How many digits are there to the left of the decimal place in the square root of 692,038.42753? Or this. A yellow tulip viewed through a piece of blue glass looks what color? Or this. Why does the Little Dipper appear to turn about the North Star once a day? Or this. Astronomy is to geology as steeplejack is to what? And so on. Hi-ho. We made good on Eliza's promise of perfection, as I have said. The only trouble was that the two of us, in the innocent process of checking and rechecking our answers, wound up under the table, with our legs wrapped around each other's necks in scissor grips, and snorting and snuffling into each other's crotches. When we regained our chairs, Dr. Cordelia Swain Cordner had fainted, and our parents were gone. At 10 o'clock the next morning, I was taken by automobile to a school for severely disturbed children on Cape Cod. Alright, I'll do some more tomorrow. Hope you like it. Thanks. Good night.